The library at Ashmore Park had the particular cold of rooms that had not been loved for a long time. Not neglect. Every shelf was dusted, every spine aligned, every globe and inkwell in its designated place. The room had the stillness of a place kept, rather than inhabited, and Cecily Vane felt it in the back of her neck the moment she stepped across the threshold. She had been told to wait. She had been told, specifically, to wait in the library, until Lord Aldous Hartwell was prepared to receive her. The footman who escorted her had said this without apology, without explanation, without any apparent awareness that she had traveled from Bath for this appointment, and that the appointment had been made at Lord Aldous's own request. She had smoothed her gloves, thanked him, and waited. The paper was in her reticule. She had not taken it out since Bath. She did not take it out now. She stood at the window and looked at the grounds below, the bare November trees, the gray stone balustrade, the kitchen garden stripped to its winter bones, and felt the weight of what she carried as though it were far heavier than a single folded sheet. She heard the door behind her open and turned, expecting Aldous. It was not Aldous. The man in the doorway was of similar height to Lord Aldous. Similar build, and yet nothing else about him matched the portrait in the hall she had passed on her way in. Where Aldous's painted likeness wore its authority with practiced ease, this man carried himself as though he had learned some time ago to take up less room than he was entitled to. His dark brown eyes found her at the window, registered her presence with a quality of attention that was not quite recognition, and then he went very still. "Miss Vane," he said. She did not know how he knew her name. "Yes," she said. "I am Edmund Hartwell." He did not say the rest. She supplied it herself, the way one does when the rest is something the speaker has long since stopped saying aloud, the part left unspoken that both of them understood, that he was the second, twin, that the dukedom was his brother's, that he was here in this library, a guest in the house his father had built and his brother now held. "I did not know you were expected," she said. "I was not." He crossed the room without any particular hurry and stopped at a proper distance. His eyes moved to her hands, her reticule, her face, and back. "I came about the papers," he said, his voice low. "My brother wrote to say they had been found among your father's things." Cecily's breath did not quite leave her, but she felt the place where it had been. "Your brother wrote to you. He thought I ought to know." Edmund paused. "He wanted me here when he spoke to you. I am not entirely certain why." She thought she could guess. She thought she could guess a great many things from the particular way he said it, the slight, careful flatness of his voice where another man might have let contempt slip through. She had read her father's papers. She knew more about him than he likely knew she knew, and the knowledge sat between them in the library like a third person who had not been introduced. "How long have you been waiting?" he asked. "3/4 of an hour." Something passed across his face. "Sit down," he said. Not an invitation, not unkind, something else entirely. And she felt it in the same moment. Her feet registered the sense of the command and moved toward the nearest chair. She sat. He remained standing, one hand resting on the back of the chair across from her, not sitting, not pacing, simply present. "He will come," Edmund said. "He always does. Eventually." If she was the solicitor's daughter and nothing more, she thought, at least she did not have to pretend to know what it meant to wait forever in rooms that had once been meant for you. Her father had been Robert Vane, solicitor to the late Duke of Ashmore for nearly 30 years. He had been a careful man, a methodical man, a man who had made notes in the margins of documents the way other men made conversation, because he could not help himself, because the impulse to record and verify was threaded into his blood. He had died in September, in the quiet of his study, at his desk, with his pen still in his hand. Cecily had been the one to find him. She had been the one to sort through his papers in the weeks that followed. And she had found the record tucked into a folder labeled with the Hartwell crest, and the date of September the 8th, 1803. The day the twin sons of the Duke of Ashmore had been born. The midwife's notation was in an old hand, faded to brown at the edges. First, twin born at 4 of the morning. Edmund, the second. Aldous, 40 minutes later. And in the margin, in her father's familiar and precise script, in ink that was darker and therefore newer than the midwife's entry verified, R.V. The name had been altered in the primary record. He had found the original. He had confirmed it. He had written it in the margin, and then done nothing with it for 20 years. She had sat for a long time at his desk with the paper in her hands, trying to understand what kind of man did that. What kind of man verified a truth and then folded it away? She had not yet arrived at an answer that she could bear. To the staff at Ashmore Park, Cecily Vane was the solicitor's daughter. Nothing more than that. Lady Hartwell had made this plain in the carriage drive, in the hearing of the footman and the housekeeper both, on the morning Cecily arrived to discuss the disposition of her father's files. The solicitor's daughter, she had said to Miss Philippa Crail, who sat beside her in the hall like an exhibit of everything Cecily was not. Silk, diamonds, 3 seasons behind her, and none of them wasted. One must be thorough about these things. Even with the solicitor's daughter. And Miss Crail had smiled, the way people smile when they are performing sympathy for an audience. And Cecily had thanked the housekeeper for her trouble, and followed the footman to the library. She had not seen him that morning. She had not known he existed, not as a person, only as a name in her father's files, a birth record, a 40-minute difference that had been made to mean nothing. Now, she watched him from across the library and thought that 40 minutes was a very small thing to carry for 32 years. He had brought her a glass of water without asking whether she wanted one. He had done it while she was looking at the window, and she had found it at her elbow when she turned. She thought about the quality of attention required to notice that someone was tired and thirsty when you were also in the room that had been stolen from you, and she thought it was not a small quality. "The papers," she said. "My father verified something. You know this. Aldous told me there was a record. He did not move from his position by the chair. He told me it was confused, that it was probably a clerical error. And you believed him?" Edmund was quiet for a moment. "I believed that whatever was in those papers my father knew, and that my father chose what he chose." This was the part she had not been able to fold away. She held it now as she had held it for 6 weeks, and felt its edges. "Your father may not have known," she said. "The primary record was altered before it reached him. My father found the midwife's original and verified it. But he did not. He kept it," Edmund said. "He kept it." The fire in the grate was the only sound. Edmund looked at the floor, then at the fire, then at her, a slow, deliberate movement like a man finding his bearings. "I am sorry," he said, "about your father." She had not expected this. She found she could not speak for a moment. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded. Once. Then Aldous walked in, and the room changed entirely. If you find yourself staying with this story, perhaps leave a quiet word in the comments. It helps to know who is here. Aldous Hartwell was everything his portrait had promised and nothing his brother was. He moved through the library as though it rearranged itself around him, and perhaps it always had. It was broad where Edmund was lean, loud in his movements where Edmund was still, and he looked at Cecily with the particular expression of a man who knows exactly what he is looking at, and has decided it requires only moderate attention. "Miss Vane," he crossed to the desk and did not offer a chair. "I understand you have something belonging to my family." Edmund, still standing, had gone very quiet. Cecily could not see his face, but she could see his hand on the chair back, and the slight arrested quality of it. "I have papers belonging to the late Duke's estate," she said. "My father was your father's solicitor for 30 years. The papers passed to me as part of his files." "A clerical error," Aldous said. "Our solicitor, Tiverton, has confirmed as much. Whatever your father wrote in the margins, the primary record is clear. I am the elder. This has never been in question. The primary record was altered," Cecily said. Aldous' face went through something fast and small. "Miss Vane," he said, his voice descending into something gentler and therefore more dangerous. You are a solicitor's daughter. You understand that records are complex documents. Your father was a good man, but he was not a peer, and this is not a matter for the midwife is still living, Cecily said. She is 71 years old, and she lives in Marlborough. My father's note references her by name. Silence. Then Aldous turned to Edmund and said something with his eyes that Cecily could not read, and Edmund looked back at him and said nothing at all. The dinner that followed was exactly what she had expected, and worse than she had prepared for. She presided at the head of the table with the authority of a woman who had survived everything the world had thrown at her by ensuring she was always the one doing the throwing. Miss Philippa Crale was at her right hand, dressed in pale blue that made Cecily's cream gown look like something borrowed, which it was. It had been her mother's, retrimmed twice. The solicitor's daughter, Aldous said at some point in the hearing of the 4 other guests, with an easy sideways gesture toward Cecily that made it clear he meant no harm, which was precisely why it was so effective. We are grateful to her father's memory. These old papers have a way of being complicated. He smiled at the table. But complications are what solicitors are for. Cecily kept her hands still in her lap. She looked at her plate. She did not look at Edmund, who was across from her, because she did not want to see him deciding whether to speak, and she did not want to see him deciding not to. He did not speak. He did some minutes later ask her very quietly whether she preferred the lamb or the fish, and when she said the fish, he caught the footman's eye before she could, and arranged it without drawing anyone's notice. And she thought that the night was very long, and that the specific quality of his attention to small things was not a small thing at all. The dowager found her in the corridor after dinner in that graceful way women of her position had of finding one in corridors, as though it were entirely accidental. "My dear," she said, "I hope all this has not been too direct." "He means well. He is the Duke, now, and dukes are sometimes direct." "Of course," Cecily said. "Your father was a fine man. The fan moved once precisely. He served this family faithfully for 30 years. I would hate for his memory to be complicated by a document that is simply confused." Cecily looked at her and understood, in the same moment, several things at once. That the dowager knew exactly what the document said, that she had known for 30 years, and that she was afraid not of Cecily. Of the midwife in Marlborough. Of the ink her father had put in a margin and never seen fit to use. "What would you have me do with the paper?" Cecily asked. "Give it to Tiverton," she said. "He is the family solicitor. It belongs with the family papers." She smiled. The solicitor's daughter of all people should understand that. Edmund found her in the garden the following morning, in the rose arbor, stripped bare for winter. He had not announced himself, and she had heard him on the gravel before she saw him. His footsteps, deliberate, unhurried, the footsteps of a man who had decided to come and was not second-guessing the decision. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me nothing," Cecily said. He stopped at the entrance to the arbor and seemed to consider this seriously. "I owe you the truth, at least about why I said nothing last night." He looked at the stone wall beyond her, at the bare canes, at the gray sky. "My father was dying. I was 23. He called us both to his bedside. And he named Aldous. He said Aldous was the elder. He said it as though he had always believed it." Cecily waited. "I did not speak," Edmund said, "because I thought he knew. I thought I had been told my whole life that I was born second. I believed it. It had never occurred to me to verify what I had been told. And my father believed it, and he was dying, and I—" He stopped. "You let him die in peace," she said. "I do not know if that is what it was." His voice was entirely level, the way voices are level when considerable effort has gone into keeping them so. I thought later that perhaps I said nothing because I was afraid. Not of the dukedom. Of being the kind of man who argues with his dying father about which of them came first. She looked at him then. The winter light was thin and even, and it showed his face without flattery. The lines at the corners of his eyes, The particular set of his mouth, the way he was holding himself against something he had carried for a long time. "My father," she said slowly, "verified the original record, wrote it in the margin in his own hand, and then filed it away and never spoke of it. I have spent 6 weeks trying to understand why." "Perhaps," Edmund said, "he was afraid of the same thing. That he was a coward. That mercy and cowardice look exactly alike from the outside." She felt the truth of this in her chest, like a key finding its lock. She had not expected him to say it. She had not expected a man in his position to say it about himself with such quiet precision, as though he had worked it out alone over a long time, and had not quite made peace with the conclusion. "I cannot give the paper to Tiverton," she said. "Your brother asked me to. Your mother asked me to. If I give it to the family solicitor, it will disappear." Edmund looked at her steadily. "I know." "What will you do?" "Whatever you decide," he said. "It is your paper. It was your father's. He could have used it at any time in 30 years. He chose not to. If you choose the same, I will not think less of him or of you." She thought about her father at his desk, the pen in his hand, the margin note that had gone unspoken. She thought about what it cost a careful man to be careful in the wrong direction. She thought about him at 23, watching his father die, saying nothing, carrying it for 12 years. Some truths, she thought, are not made smaller by being kept. They are made heavier. "I will not give it to Tiverton," she said, "but I will not give it to you either." He waited. "I will give it to the proper authority," she said. "Not the family solicitor, the College of Heralds, or a senior peer who sits outside this household entirely." Edmund was quiet. Then he said, "That will take some time to arrange, I know." He looked at her with the held particular attention she was beginning to understand was simply how he looked at things he had decided mattered. "Walk with me," he said, and turned back toward the gravel path before she had agreed, in the way of a man who is not issuing an order but is simply moving forward and believes on some level, beneath speech, that she will come. She came. The next 3 days at Ashmore Park were the kind of days that happen at the edge of an event too large to look at directly. Cecily moved through the household with the careful neutrality she had always cultivated, answering questions with courtesy, deflecting pressure with the politeness her father had taught her, and spending her evenings in the small room the housekeeper had assigned her with the paper in her hands, reading her father's handwriting until she knew it the way she knew her own. Edmund was present in the house and absent from it at the same time. He arrived at meals, spoke to Aldous with the exact, measured warmth of a man who has decided what his feelings are and is not prepared to perform anything different. He spoke to Cecily at meals with the same measured courtesy he would have shown any guest, except that twice he placed himself between her and the dowager at a natural turn in the conversation without appearing to do so, and once, when Aldous made the solicitor's daughter observation a third time, reported by the housekeeper as something he'd said to Miss Crail in the drawing-room. Just loudly enough to travel, Edmund had appeared at Cecily's door that evening with a candle and said, very quietly, that she was not obliged to remain a guest in this house, and that his own carriage was available if she preferred to leave. She had said she was not leaving. He had looked at her for a moment, and then nodded and gone back down the corridor, and she had stood at the door feeling something she did not have a name for, and did not try to name. She wrote to Mr. Blank, Tiverton's superior, a solicitor in London who had no connection to the Hartwell estate, and she wrote to an acquaintance of her father's at the College of Heralds. She sealed both letters with her own wax, addressed them in her own hand, and gave them to a postal rider on the 4th morning before anyone in the house was awake. Then she went back to her room and sat down, and found that her hands were shaking, and that the shaking was not fear, but something else. The particular physical sensation of having done a thing you cannot undo, of having set something in motion that will arrive in its own time at its own conclusion. The door opened. She had not locked it. She had not thought to. It was Aldous. She stood up. The paper was in her reticule on the chair beside her. She did not reach for it. Aldous looked at the reticule, then at her. "You have sent letters," he said. "Not a question." "I have attended to my correspondence," she said. His face was very still in a way that was nothing like his brother's stillness. Edmund's stillness was thought. Aldous' stillness now was calculation. "Miss Vane," he said, "I want you to understand something. The paper your father kept does not establish what you believe it establishes. It establishes that your father wrote something in a margin. Nothing more. The primary record is clear, and has been clear for 32 years. No court, no college, no senior peer will overturn 32 years of clear succession on the basis of a margin note written by a dead solicitor." "The midwife is still living," she said. Something moved in his face. "A woman of 71, he said, with a 71-year-old memory of a night in 1803. Her testimony, if she even gives it, will be confused and unverifiable. You are not protecting Edmund. You are giving him hope, so that you can watch him lose." She held herself very still and did not answer. "Give me the paper," Aldous said. "No," she said. He looked at her for a long time. Then he turned and walked out, and she heard him in the corridor giving instructions to someone in a low and level voice, and she thought that this was what it meant to be the second twin's advocate, the solicitor's daughter who had read too many margins in too many documents, and she knew what a man sounded like when he was afraid enough to act. And you knew that the time you had was now very short. She found Edmund in the stable yard an hour later. He was checking a horse's shoe, his coat off in the cold morning, completely absorbed. He looked up when he heard her on the gravel and straightened, and she saw on his face the moment he read hers. "It is done," she said. "I have written to London. To a solicitor outside the family's reach and to the College of Heralds. The letters went at dawn." He was still for a moment, then he said, "Cecily," her given name. The first time he had used it. He said it without apparent consciousness of having done so. But she felt the exact weight of it in the place below her sternum where her body kept its truths. "You may lose," she said. "He may be right that the margin note is insufficient. The midwife may not remember clearly. I cannot promise. You did not have to do this," he said. "My father should have," she said. "He knew. He had 30 years. He chose to keep it quiet and keep the peace, and I have spent 6 weeks being angry at him for it. And then today I understood that if I give the paper to Aldous, I am only doing what my father did, and I am not willing to be that version of myself." Edmund set down the horse's leg and straightened fully and looked at her, and the morning light was thin and cold and showed every line of his face, and she thought she had never been looked at like that, as though she were something a careful man had been looking for without quite knowing it. "I will not let you bear this alone," he said. "You cannot prevent. Walk with me," he said, and this time she did not wait for him to turn away first. The letter from London arrived within the week, together with a reply from the College of Heralds, acknowledging receipt and promising inquiry. Aldous received both communications at breakfast with a face that showed nothing, and then went to his mother's sitting room and did not come out for 2 hours. The midwife in Marlborough, whose name was Mrs. Pell, was located by the London solicitor's clerk within a fortnight. She was 71, as Cecily had said. She was also, as the clerk's letter reported, entirely precise in her memory of the night in question. She had attended 317 births in her career. She remembered everyone. She had written what she had written. She could not account for how the primary record had been altered thereafter. She would say so. Under any legal examination anyone cared to put to her. This letter arrived on a Thursday evening. Edmund read it in the library, standing, and was still for a long time. "What does it feel like?" Cecily asked, because she had learned in the past fortnight that he would tell her things in the library, that he would not say elsewhere, and that what he told her was always the truest version of what he meant. "Like being handed a room I had given up expecting to enter," he said. He looked at the letter, then at her. "I do not know what to do with it. You do not have to know yet." He looked at her with a held attention she had stopped trying to prepare herself for. "What would your father have done?" he asked. "I think," she said slowly, He would have found a way to be thorough without being unkind. I think he believed that the truth could be put on record without it needing to be a weapon. Edmund nodded. Then he said, "And what would you do?" She thought about this. "I would do exactly what I have done," she said. "I would put it in front of the proper authority and let the proper authority act. Not because I want Aldous ruined. Because the record is the record, and my father verified it, and I am not willing to let that mean nothing." He set the letter down on the desk. He reached for her hand, which was on the desk beside his, and placed his over it, not taking it, not pulling, just covering it. His hand was warm, and she felt the warmth move up her arm and into her throat, and she did not pull away. "There will be a process," he said. "Tiverton has already had to disclose to London what he knew. The inquiry will take months. Aldous will contest it." "Yes," she said. "You will be in the middle of it. Your name? Your father's name. My father's name is already in the margin," she said. "That cannot be changed." He looked at their hands on the desk. He turned his over so that his was beneath hers, and she felt the difference, the way it shifted from covering to holding a small private ceremony. "I should say," he said, "that I am." He stopped. Started again. "I do not know the word for what I am. Grateful is too small. Indebted seems wrong, because I did not ask for it, and you did not do it for my sake." "I did it partly for your sake," she said. He looked up at her. "I did it because my father should have," she said, "and because the record was right, and because the truth ought to be on file somewhere. Those are the primary reasons. I also did it because—" She stopped. "Because what came next required honesty she had not quite prepared herself to produce. Because you brought me a glass of water," she said finally, "when no one asked you to. And you put yourself between me and your mother at the table without making it visible. And you said that mercy and cowardice look alike from the outside, and you said it about yourself without excusing yourself. And I find that Cecily," he said. "Yes." He lifted her hand from the desk slowly, as though each inch of the motion were something he was deciding as he went. He held it at a formal height, turned it, and pressed his lips to the inside of her wrist above the glove, just at the pulse point, just long enough to be irrevocable. And she felt her breath leave her in a way that was not quite managed. He lowered her hand. He did not release it. "I want to know you," he said. "Not in the procedural sense. I want to know what your father taught you about margins. I want to know which documents you have read, and what you wrote in them. I want—" He paused. "I am not practiced at this," he said. "I have spent 12 years being careful. I find I am done being careful in this particular direction. I am not practiced either," she said. "Good," he said, with a relief so unguarded she almost laughed. She did not laugh. She did not remove her hand. The formal inquiry convened in January, in the London chambers of a senior peer appointed by the College of Heralds. Aldous attended with 2 solicitors and a barrister. Edmund attended with Cecily and old Tiverton, who had aged a decade in a month, and who had, under the pressure of the inquiry's preliminary demands, disclosed everything he knew, which was more than anyone had expected, and more than Aldous had told him. The chamber was not large. It was a room made entirely of record, of shelf and ledger, and the weight of things that had been written down and preserved. Cecily sat at the end of the long table and felt the room's weight, and found it familiar, and did not look at Aldous. Edmund sat beside her. Lady Hartwell had not come. She had sent a letter instead, which Tiverton read aloud at the senior peer's request. It was a letter of acknowledgment. It said that she had known at the time of the birth that the midwife's record had been altered, that she had directed the alteration, and that she had done so because she believed Aldous was the stronger child and more fit to lead the estate, and that her husband had concurred. She wrote it in the formal, precise language of a woman who has decided that the truth stated in her own terms is preferable to the truth extracted without them. Cecily heard Aldous's breath change at the next chair. The midwife's deposition was read into the record by the London solicitor. It was brief and entirely certain. Her father's margin note was entered as corroborating documentation. The senior peer asked whether anyone present wished to contest the documentation's authenticity. No one spoke. Edmund put his hand on the table, not on her hand but beside it, close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. "Miss Vane," the senior peer said, "you were the one who brought this record forward. Is there anything you wish to add to the record before we proceed?" She thought of her father at his desk. She thought of the pen in his hand, the margin note, the 30 years of careful silence. She thought about what it meant to verify a truth and do nothing with it, and what it meant, finally, to do something. "Only that the record speaks," she said. "I have nothing to add to it." The senior peer nodded. He looked at Edmund. He looked at the documentation before him. Then he said in the procedural tone of a man who has done this before and knows its weight, "Edmund Hartwell was born first. This is witnessed." Edmund did not move. Id don't. She felt him not move. The deliberate held stillness of a man absorbing something the body has not yet made room for. Aldous had gone very still in his chair. His barrister made a brief motion, and Aldous shook his head, almost imperceptibly, and the barrister was still. The room was absolutely quiet. Then Edmund looked at the senior peer and said, "I ask that my brother be given the appropriate time to arrange his affairs. He has managed the estate in good faith for 12 years. The estate's tenants and staff should not suffer the confusion of an abrupt transition." The senior peer noted this. Then Edmund turned to Cecily, and across the table and the documentation and the record of everything her father had known and kept, and finally said. He looked at her and said in a voice that was quiet and entirely level and did not waver, "She brought the truth. I ask only that you read it." The procedural confirmation was duly entered into the record of the session. They were in the carriage before she let herself feel it. The January streets of London passed the window, grey stone, bare trees, the particular watery light of a winter afternoon already going to dusk, and Edmund sat across from her in the carriage in the way he had. That quality of stillness that she had come to understand was not absence, but the opposite of absence. And she looked at him and felt everything she had been holding for 6 weeks, or perhaps her whole life, begin very slowly to settle. "You were kind," she said. "About Aldous. The time to arrange his affairs." "He did not know," Edmund said. "Whatever my mother knew, whatever Tiverton suspected, Aldous believed what he had been told. He has governed the estate believing it was his by right." He looked at the window. "That does not make it his. It means he is not a villain. He is only a man who was told a wrong story and made it his identity." She thought about that. "And what story will you make yours?" she asked. He looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not the fast, small movement of calculation as she had seen in Aldous, but the slower movement of a person who is thinking about what they actually mean and intend to say it. "One, I build rather than inherit," he said. "One in which the record is accurate and the margins are visible." He paused. "And one in which you are present," he said, "if you are willing." She looked at his hands, folded in his lap, the hands that had given her water in the library, that had placed themselves between her and the cold weight of the household machinery, that had held hers in a study while he told her he wanted to know her. "I am present now," she said. "I know," he said. "I mean for the whole of it." She understood what he was asking. She felt it in the same place she had felt, his lips at her wrist, the pulse point where the body keeps its truths. "Yes," she said. He did not speak again. He crossed the carriage and sat beside her, and after a moment, as the London streets gave way to the road out of the city, he took her hand in both of his with a care so complete it asked nothing, and they rode in silence as the light changed and the bare trees of the winter countryside came up around them. The estate at Ashmore Park was still bare in February when Cecily returned for the first time as something other than a guest. The transition had been managed over 6 weeks with the ordered thoroughness Edmund had asked for, and Aldous had gone to his remaining property in Shropshire. and the dowager had retreated to the London house, and the staff who had served the estate through all of it were still in their places, waiting to see what kind of man he would be when the house was finally his. She thought she already knew. She found him in the library, where she had first found him. The fire was lit, and it was warm, and he was at the desk with a stack of papers at his elbow, and a cup of tea going cold beside him, reading with the absorbed quality of a man who has been given back something large, and is making sure he understands what he has received. He looked up when she came in and stood, which he had always done, and the room did not feel like a room kept, rather than inhabited anymore. There was a frame on the mantelpiece. She had not seen it before. She went to look at it, and found it was a small piece of paper, framed in plain wood, the handwriting brown, and the annotations in the margin darker. Her father's hand, the notation she had read 100 times. "You had it framed," she said. "It belongs in the room," he said. "It is what the room is built on." She looked at it for a long time. The marginal note, Verakive Darvi, her father's name, in his careful script. The truth he had held so long it had become the weight he died carrying, and which she had finally carried out of the margin, and into the record where it could be seen. She thought that perhaps that was what the careful men did, the ones who verified and waited and did not yet know what to do with what they had found. Perhaps they were waiting for the right person to carry it the rest of the way. She was not angry at him anymore. Edmund came to stand beside her at the mantelpiece, close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him at her shoulder. He did not speak. He looked at the frame with her, the way two people look at a thing that belongs to both of them now. And in the quiet of the library, with the fire going and the February light low and the whole of the estate settling into its new shape around them, she felt the specific weight of a truth that has finally been witnessed lift from her chest. She turned toward him. He took both her hands as he had in the carriage with the same unhurried care, and then he looked at her. The full-held attention she had never once felt was anything other than what it was, and said her name, and she said his. And the library at Ashmore Park was warm.